Well, marketing in the Netherlands started, let's say, in the 50s and the 60s. It comes originally from economics because in the earlier days we didn't have business schools in the Netherlands and marketing was part of the School of Economics. There we have a number of pioneers that are internationally not so well known, but they were really good thinkers, but they were really focused in much of their writing on the local market in Dutch. Then later on in the 70s, 80s, the scope broadened. The number of people started to write more in English, and also the scope was broadened from more an economic background towards a broader background in which strategy, managerial and behavioral research also became much more important. And nowadays these different areas are covered, and when you look at the Netherlands academic publications, the productivity, say per capita or so, it has become pretty high. Well, a couple of things have been very important. At the national level, the government instituted a research assessment exercise modeled after the UK, which meant that every 5 years, and that's still going on, all departments in the Netherlands are being evaluated by an independent committee of, especially with a number of foreigners involved, that evaluate the quality of the academic research, and that is being rated on different criteria. And that has become pretty important for allocation of funds. But the national level has been actually less important than two other things. First, in the 80s, several economists started to develop what has become the top 40 most productive economists, and that includes economists and people in business. And that list was published every year based on a weighted number of publications in top journals in the last 5 years. Now, the point is that a number of people that thought that they were really good, and I'm not saying they were not good, but the point is they did not figure very prominently on that list. So people started to feel the need to produce more output in these top journals because the list was only based on top journals. That was, if you will, a private initiative. Then a third aspect is that several of the universities, about 2-3 universities in the Netherlands, they decided, the dean often of the Faculty of Economics and Business decided that he really wanted to put research first, and he focused only on a select set of top-level publications that they would count for things like teaching, for salaries, etc. So most of it was actually done not at the country level, but at the level of really the marketing or the broader business and economics discipline. I would say the biggest unique contribution that the Dutch model has given there is the fact that in the Netherlands, at a number of these universities, the marketing department fostered close collaboration with the Department of Econometrics. So essentially what you find in people that study econometrics are usually within economics, but some of them are really interested to do essentially applied econometrics, if you will, as opposed to theoretical econometrics. And applied econometrics is marketing or can be finance. So what we have now in the Netherlands, it was developed over the years, is within the econometrics study that you can do econometrics for marketing, econometrics for finance, and a number of our best students actually come from those programs that have an undergraduate, often a master's in econometrics, but then applied econometrics, they get into marketing. Later, what you also find is that the number of people in psychology, which also train some really good people, they are attracted to a slightly more applied side, if you will, and so we essentially benefit from the fact that our undergraduate program and our master's program, they're kind of really integrated because very few people drop out in between. they tend to be traditionally of a relatively high scientific quality. They are not always that practical, but scientifically they are pretty good. Now that has been a really good basis of students for our program. Well, there is a point here, is that the teaching load generally for junior people is, compared to what you see in a lot of countries, including the US, is kind of very light. So many people can get away, quote unquote, with perhaps 1.5 course that they teach per year, plus a few thesis supervisions. That is all. So that makes it attractive for people that really want to focus on research to stay in the Netherlands, because they do realize that, say, in some other countries they may earn more money, but actually in the Netherlands they may be able to do more research, so to invest in their future. That doesn't mean that you can keep everybody, but it does mean that we have something to offer. And the same goes in terms of the salary. In the past, that was all government mandated, was completely independent of performance. That is not the case anymore. Salaries can vary a whole lot. Well, there is some brain drain, because some Europeans, some Dutchmen have left. For example, I'm currently at UNC, and Michel Bedel is at Maryland, for example. But let's say on average, it's tend to be modest. I would say, in a number of cases, it has to do with the lifestyle issue. Some people really like to live in the Netherlands, in their fatherland, because of family reasons, or because they just like the lifestyle there more. But realistically speaking, that is not going to work if there are no other things that can help. So what you have in the Netherlands now is that if you are a top-level researcher, your teaching load is very light. It's much lighter than what you would have in the United States. Your salary is, we have government-mandated maximum salaries for full professors, say, but actually you can top that up with a whole lot extra. So the model has become much more, say, competitive than it used to be, and that goes actually completely against the Dutch culture of everybody being equal, which kind of suggests that other countries can do that too, because the Dutch model is not consistent with the Dutch culture that excellence is rewarded so much. It's absolutely the second. Very few scholars that have gone to the United States, say to do their PhD, have gone back to the Netherlands. And those people that have come back, I think everybody is for family reasons. I can't come up with anything else. And that may have to do with the fact that if you have done your PhD in the US, you may not be very interested to come back to the Netherlands. Perhaps it is a lifestyle issue, or there are some other issues as well. So the success is mostly due to Dutch PhD students or students from Europe that do their PhD in the Netherlands and that stay there. Those visits have been, for me, crucial, and I don't know any of my colleagues in the Netherlands that haven't spent some time here that wasn't crucial. Let me just give you one anecdote. First time I was on sabbatical here, 1989, 1990. I was at Penn State, and I had a great time there. And somebody asked me, okay, about your dissertation, where did you submit your paper to? And I said, well, I submitted it to, let me not mention the journal, but let's say it's a kind of more of a minor journal, because the editor asked me, to submit the article to that journal. And then My American colleague said, "Why did you submit it to that journal?" At that point, it was like St. Paul to Damascus. Everything became clear to me because nobody read that journal. Nobody cared about it. And so what I learned there was one of the most important things is that there is such a huge difference between, say, the top journals and other journals. And that is something that you can read about. You have to experience it. That's one of the things that I've learned. And the second thing is that I got there into touch with some colleagues. We started to do research together, and actually I continue to do research with people that I met at these stages. And I'm not alone. I know that from a lot of other people have had the same experience. Things have changed a whole lot. When I submitted my first paper to JMR together with my friend Michel Wedel, one of the reviewers said, you know, don't you have American data? We had Dutch data on which we developed the model. Don't you have American data? I don't really understand this. The editor, by the way, said completely ignored his comments, which was great. But the point is that was 1991. That has not been the case anymore. What I've now noted is, and I know that from myself in my role as on editorial boards and so on, is that there is a much greater interest, even eagerness for international data. And the associations like AMA and Informs, etc., when you look at the board, when you look at the articles, I believe they have become really global organizations in their own right. One could even argue that the name American Marketing Association is not completely consistent with what this organization really stands for around the world. I think the EMAC, the European Marketing Academy, and IJRM, the official journal, and extremely good journal, have been very important. Because for a number of people that are, starting to go from local to a more international scope, those are the first touch points to go to an EMAC conference, because it is closer by, it's a little cheaper than flying across the ocean. Maybe one of the first times that you encounter international scholars from all parts of the world. So I think it makes it a lot more accessible to Dutch scholars, but also to non-Dutch scholars. And IJRM is a journal where people feel it is very open to research being done with European data or Dutch data. Now these days, by the way, I think that also applies to the American journals, but I still think IJRM feels a little closer to home. I think one of the reasons is that we all started out as local players, writing in our local language. However, if you are from the Germanic or the French-speaking area or so, then you could say with some reasonable, confidence that it is a fairly important language area. Nobody can argue that Dutch is a fairly important language area. So we already had earlier the push to go international, because we could never uphold the fiction that writing in Dutch, was, equal to writing in a language that everybody could read. I think the other nations took somewhat longer, and sometimes there might be some nationalism, whether you have to write your dissertation in the local language. That has helped. I think some of the other ones have also, I guess, has to do with the governance of universities. But you see, in Germany, for example, what a few people can make a difference. Germany has become a very productive area, and many of the students that are very productive, they're all essentially students of Sönke Albers. He was one of the Germans who really took his ambition to a global level. He trained a lot of students with that ambition. They liked that ambition rather than being just German in Germany, and that has kind of accelerated the process. I think so, because Germany, as I just mentioned, is one of these countries that have mimicked it, and that has become very important in its own right, as it should be as a major nation. There is no reason why other countries, both in Europe and in other parts of the world, cannot do the same thing. To me, what really makes the point is whether we really believe that we go for top quality as opposed to sticking to a fiction that writing in the local language, that local journals in the local language, whether it is in Chinese or Hindi, or it is in German or in French, are at even remotely the same level as writing in English, because only with English you are facing global competition. The other ones you are facing, essentially, it's a monopolistic competition. Well, I leave the designation of a star to other people, but yes, it is so that the model initially started with a few stars. And those are people that essentially they got this ambition to do it on their own, to reach for the top. I think any program, any country needs some stars, as call it role models, and I'm not referring to myself, but other people essentially to look up to. Now what you then have is, that was the first way, but these, let's say, established researchers, they train other PhD students, and they are not happy with mediocrity. So, for example, currently I have 4 of my PhD students are currently full professor in the Netherlands, and some others are in the US, and that applies to a number of other people as well. So what you get initially it was a fairly small group of people that was really carrying the productivity. Now, because of what the Germans would call the Nachwuchs, essentially the PhD students and the PhD students of the PhD student, it has broadened considerably. I would say the relationship between marketing practice and marketing academia in the Netherlands tend to be quite close. There is a lot of interaction, there is a lot of collaboration going on, and one of the things that let's say marketing scholars would be interested in to get data, the Netherlands is a society in which it's a high trust society. So we don't need big contracts. Essentially, when we trust each other, you get the data, and it goes on like that. The Netherlands is not unique. Germany is an example of a country where this is even stronger, but it certainly is a difference from all my experience in the US, where if there is collaboration, absolutely can be the case, but it is a lot more cautious, with a lot more, say, lawyers involved. And most marketing people like data, not lawyers. But I think it's a little sad that we, who in our work, in our papers, write very elaborate theories, very complex models, that we say kind of simplify the world so much, as if, let's say, they are not mixing different elements. Like, for example, the moment that you analyze household scanner data with quantitative models, you are, for example, studying real behavior. But acknowledging your point, it is indeed true. AMA is primarily managerial, ACR is primarily behavioral, and marketing science conference is primarily quant. What I see is that probably in the future we will get a closer convergence between quant and managerial, because a lot of the quantitative researchers, they want to address managerially relevant questions, or they have to do it because they need data that are often provided by a company, and you won't get it if you don't answer any question that these companies are interested in. Whereas the behavioral area, which is less dependent on data from, say, commercial providers or companies, I don't see the convergence as yet very strong between the behavioral on the one hand and the managerial and quant on the other hand, which is sad. Well, apart from the fact that, of course, for teaching purposes you need all these things, I think only when a country has essentially a great historical competence in one of the particular areas, for example, as top-notch psychology, but in terms of econometrics is very weak, and that therefore you would have to focus on the behavioral aspect. I don't know actually many of these examples. If that doesn't apply, I don't think a country should specialize. I mean, ultimately, marketing science progresses by insights on all these different elements. So focus, perhaps for smaller academic groups, it may make sense to focus on one area versus another, but as a country, I don't think that would be fruitful. I think tenure and promotion standards are ever going to be tighter. In some countries where, say, they're earlier in the curve in terms of marketing academics, the tenure standards will tighten because they tend to be actually fairly low to begin with, and they will probably want to tighten this as they want to up the game. In other countries, say like the United States, what you also see is that they continue to be tightened because deans seem to be ever more cautious to give people tenure because, essentially you have a contract for life, and the recent, financial troubles in the economy have shown that that can be an issue with. So realistically speaking, the standards will only increase. Then in terms of the research problems, ultimately people will do whatever they want, but we get a lot of input from different sources that suggests that big data, business analytics, marketing decisions based on analytical decision making, perhaps even you could think about decision support systems, and digital, that's not a great surprise. They are going to be major areas moving forward. It's one of my personal hobbies, perhaps. What I believe is also increasingly relevant is, as companies globalize ever more, that we understand really better a lot about the contextual, the institutional, the cultural context that decide managerial decision making, but also the effectiveness of marketing instruments. We have gotten some insights along that way, but a lot of the research is still very much, say, context free within a particular country. And I believe that some of the most interesting academic questions are, why are things different across countries? Or can we do the same thing across countries? But then especially to understand why that is the case. Now, these kind of mechanisms, I believe we are going to see more research on that as well. How many hours of sleep do you need? Honestly, I don't think the idea that if we don't take teaching obligations, obviously have to come and have to be fulfilled, I believe that there is a near linear relationship between the number of hours that you put into your work and the career success. Especially in the beginning, because you don't ride an experience curve in the beginning. You are building up a lot of experience. And yes, there are some people that go into academia with perhaps the expectation of having a 40-hour week. That's fine, but let's say very few people will be able to really make an international career with that number of hours, unless you're Einstein. You know, Einstein wrote his famous articles while having another job. But I mean, I don't think we, you know, I think Einstein was pretty unique. I think one of the main things is that what we have in China and India are a number of very prestigious institutions, but they are to some extent prestigious because they are prestigious. They may not be prestigious because they are really at the international level in terms of academic output that puts them, let's say, in the top in the world. So what I notice when I talk to my friends in China and in India is that actually, if you are at such an institution, you are a local hero, perhaps a local god, but actually internationally it doesn't really mean that much. I don't think that is a situation that is satisfactory. When I talk with people, also students, at top Chinese or top Indian institutions, I mean, they are incredibly smart. So I think it is the time, hopefully that is going to happen, to leverage that quality. But the first thing I believe that has to be done is to come clean and say, okay, this is the list of top journals on which essentially we are going to evaluate the people within our own institution, and that has to be a list that does not include any local journal, only English journals, and that has to be a list that is essentially internationally accepted. And for those, we have those lists. You know, you have the Business Week list, or the UT Dallas list, or perhaps the Financial Times list. You know, there is some variation, but essentially I think that has to be the metric. And the moment that you do that, what you will then see is if you would rank institutions along that output, then perhaps some deans and some chairman of the marketing department, etc., will kind of notice, no, actually, we are very good, but it doesn't really show up in the numbers. And that will create, I think, an incentive mechanism. And this is not new. This is essentially much of the success in the Netherlands, is by measuring it, by laying it out in the open. A lot of people were really, really concerned. And first they were angry, said it doesn't really get us. I was there. I was a junior person at the time, so I had no stake in the game. A number of the senior people were very upset because it did not really give full benefit to all their insights, and perhaps that is true. However, I compared that to 10 years later, and interestingly, just one point is, if you were in the top 40, if you were number one in the Economist and Business top 40 in 1985, you would not even be number 40 in 1995. That is the effect that it had. It brought it out very much in the open, and I hope that India and China are going to do the same thing. And then, given the size of the countries and the number of very smart people there, I think the marketing journals will be inundated with top quality work. I think what is crucial along the way is English fluency. That is something that applies to Dutch, that applies to everybody else. The ability to read, speak, and write English is just crucial. And I want to emphasize that that is something that is learned by everybody who is not native English speaking. You are not native English speaking. My native language is not English. And that is something, essentially without English fluency, there is no story. The only thing that I would like to share perhaps in the end is, at the end of the day, there is not so much of a magical bullet. If I look at myself and some of the others in the Netherlands, all our education was in Dutch. At the university, all our education, in my undergraduate and master's degree, everything was in Dutch. The first thing that I ever wrote in English, that was when I was a PhD student, I wrote a conference paper, I sweated one sentence after the other. The point is, if I can do it, if Michel Wedel can do it, if Rick Peters can do it, and some other people that have written by now a whole lot, I don't see any reason why an Indian, a young Indian, a young Chinese professor, or for that matter from Brazil, any other country, can't do it either. English is not our native language either, and unless you believe the Dutchmen are genetically more intelligent than Indians or Chinese, which I don't believe, I would think, what are we waiting for?
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.